Hello, everyone. Welcome to Regenerate You. I'm Dr. Nirvana here with medical intuitive Amy Hamilton, and this is another episode of Intuitive Healing. Today, we are going to be discussing food sensitivities because we all have them, whether it's just a few or a lot. I've seen a lot in people, but it's really important that we discuss why we get them and what is going on energetically in our body when we do get them. So, Amy, we would love to hear your take on what happens in the body when this occurs.
Well, this is a particular, topic near and dear to my heart because I've been gluten and dairy free for almost 14 years because they're not my friend. And that's kind of how I see it in the body. Some foods, we might love them, we might think they're awful, but there's just some foods that when I see people eat them, it just makes like your cells feel puffy to me. It makes you feel gunky in your throat. It's just like there's an overall feeling like, ugh, that doesn't work. Sometimes we do a lot to power through some of those, food sensitivities. We know, oh, I shouldn't have that dairy, but I'm going to have it. I really like it. For me, it's not dairy or gluten. It's these things. It's so funny that I actually have on my desk. These. My body does not like these. Does not, but I love them. My brain, I think that, oh, I can have those and they are terrible for me, and they hurt my tummy, but every once in a while I'll push through. So that's kind of the way that it goes. There's things that make our bodies feel just not great. And when I work with people, it can be as varied as these fruit rings, or it could be regular gluten and dairy, which is more common, or it can be things like oatmeal. So for me, I'm able to pinpoint. I would love to hear from you. How do you test for this? Like, what kinds of things do you do when you're testing for food sensitivities or helping people with food
That's
sensitivities?
a really good question. I would say the very first thing is I actually like to have people eat based on their genetics. So it's a simple blood test that you can do to figure out what your DNA wants to eat. Because I find that once we get people eating based on their genetics, then all the inflammation goes away. That exactly what you're saying in the body, that yucky feeling, whether people have symptoms of headaches or skin issues or mood issues that can be related to gluten, for example, that you know very clearly from your past experiences, people experience and go through. And that I hear from my patients as well. But it doesn't just have to be gluten. It can be anything from an almond. It could be a cucumber. It just all depends on what that person is eating that's eliciting those responses. And then there are different companies out there that offer different tests, such as their skin prick test. So you can just prick your finger at home. And this particular test is done by the company name, it's Meridian Valley Labs, and it's an immunospot test. So what they're doing is they're taking 5 drops of blood from your finger, and then from there they're testing about 150 different foods, so you can determine at that time what your food sensitivity is. I would like to know though, Amy, what happens in the body when food sensitivities aren't addressed, energetically speaking?
It's really interesting because for me, sometimes food sensitivities originate, with genetics, or like my parents don't do very well with dairy. I mean, I have a genetic profile that has generations of not doing great with dairy, and that can just evolve into other issues. Like you can turn a I eat too much dairy into a colitis. Like, you can see that kind of going in and being really yucky. But I also see when there's food sensitivities that have to do with emotions. So a lot of times there'll be, okay, well, my favorite food growing up when I was with my mother and I was eating it during this traumatic event. And then that can cause the food sensitivities. And when that happens, the spiral into other emotional challenges can really kind of kick off. So it's a lot having to do with where it originates and how. When the genetics play out is a very different outlook for when it's antibiotic caused or leaky gut caused, and that's why it's so great to work with like with you as a doctor, because you're able to tell, okay, well, we've got 75 foods. That's definitely not a food issue. That's a gut issue. And sometimes if you're not able to heal over time by doing the normal process of taking things out and healing the gut, then we can look into some of the emotional issues, or some of even sometimes those past life issues that are saying it's not okay to heal, or you don't deserve enough to heal and get better and feel better.
Oh, that's a great point that you bring up. Especially, I love that you mentioned how food sensitivities start during stressful events in our life, and stressful events that we wouldn't have even thought of, such as, you know, a traumatic event, or even maybe you moved from one school to another, or you moved states, or somebody passed in your life that you loved, because your body does create, and in terms of in a medical outlook of all of this, an antibody against that food that you were eating during that stressful event. Because when you're stressed, your body produces inflammatory cytokines or messengers, and it recognizes everything that's going on in that moment. So, rotating those foods every 3 to 4 days, meaning whatever we're eating right now, not to eat that food every single day, it actually will help the body to not develop that sensitivity to it. So, I
So
think
what
that's
you're telling me is I shouldn't have been eating these for the last 3 days, and my mask, it doesn't feel good on my tummy. Why am I doing
maybe
this?
every 4 days. Try that.
What I
Oh.
do is not buy it. And I think that's part of, that's something I want to share. Like, food sensitivities are so hard, because so many times, especially with particular upbringings and different cultures, food can equal love. And changing your food can be really, really emotionally challenging, because you almost have to separate the emotion from the food and just say, here's what I'm going to eat. So even for those of us like you and I who work in this all the time, we still do fall off the wagon. I got to throw these away. I don't even know why they're sitting here. It must be someone who's listening today who really needed to hear about the peach jelly rings.
Well, we certainly do all have them. I mean, let's not talk about my food cupboard. Oh, actually, my chocolate drawer. I mean, that chocolate drawer is filled, and it's a big drawer. It's a really good big one. And I
Yeah.
think I do actually have some sort of delicious, squishy, whether it's a licorice in there or a gummy thing. Moderation in all things.
Yes. So I think that's a really important point that you talked about. It's we all do this. We all eat things that we know are not great for us, but it's the amount of time. And for adults, we can say no, we can overeat and be like, okay, I'm done, I'm out. But for our kids, when they have food sensitivities, when those adolescents have food sensitivities, it acts very, very differently. They actually want to eat it more. And it's almost sometimes becomes a compulsion. So if you've got a kid who has a developmental issue, a learning delay, and they're only eating these things, unfortunately, that's when you can kind of look into or work with functional medicine doctor to look into their food sensitivities, because in kids, it becomes that's all they eat. We as adults can say, oh, I would like to, but meh, I'm not going to. It makes me feel bad.
That's a very interesting point. Very interesting point. And have you offered maybe those kids? I think it's hard to do with kids, but certainly with adults, you can offer food diaries, because when we do food diaries, we can really get into, gosh, you know what? When I ate that, whatever it was, that food, it elicited some sort of symptom. With kids, it might be a little bit more challenging, but I think that's a key point that you bring up. If you see them eating that same food day in and day out, and they just can't give it up.
Yeah, and that's why, because sometimes with kids, you don't know all the things that are going on, depending on the age of kids, depending on where they're eating, depending on all of that. Sometimes you have everything locked down and they'll eat. I mean, with one of my sons, I could tell within an hour of eating gluten, he was mean. Like it was really obvious. But sometimes there's just so much going on, or they're eating a lot of foods that don't. So, if you're identifying it, the gold standard, you can do some of those testing. But for the kids, removing some of that stuff and then just slowly reintroducing. And then when you see what we used to call the Hulk, we're like, ooh, that is a food that we just need to get rid of, even if it's really hard. I mean, removing stuff from kids' diets. I have been there with my children and it is not fun, but it is very, very, very healing and very helpful, because you don't have to, removing the food, as you said, you can rotate it. You can, once you remove and heal the tummy, when the inflammation goes down, when that response that you're talking about goes down, you can a lot of times reintroduce the food and not have those issues. So it's really important to do that healing time and like reduce what I see as that puffiness, and then it can be okay to reintroduce it.
And I would say, on a final note, it's not just about removing the foods. That is absolutely the first step, but it's also about using different tools in your toolbox to heal, whether it's a diet diary or supplements, because it does come down to there's inflammation on the inner lining of the GI tract, right? So when that happens, we need to make sure that we're healing the inner lining of the GI tract so that we don't have that leaky gut going on anymore. Very important that those food particles aren't allowed to go into the blood to create that inflammatory type of response. So there are different supplements that I love. And, those are all things that we discussed during the appointments. Once we discover that someone does have a food sensitivity of some kind, I think definitely getting tested is a priority, and understanding the root cause of it. If it's emotionally based, this is where you come in, Amy. I mean, you really help to get to the root core of when did it first start? Because sometimes we just don't know. So you're
Yes.
a valuable asset.
Oh, well, thank you. And so are you. It's so always wonderful to work with you with both of our clients and patients, because it's just, the end goal is making all of us feel better. And food sensitivities are one of those big ones that just make you feel yucky.
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
we want to feel good when we're eating, and we want to eat foods and feel good after the fact and not dread eating. I think, eating is such a, of course, we need it to survive, but it's also, it can be fun because
Yeah.
socialize with it. And so it is a big part of being a human on this earth. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. It's always good to do this and to learn. So thank you I think this is an important topic for us to talk about today.
Thank you so much, Amy, for coming on and discussing this. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Amy or myself. And remember, when you regenerate, there's a new you every day. Bye bye, everyone. Bye, Amy.
Bye.